I swear I just heard someone crying inside that barn. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I even realized I was speaking, my flashlight beam shaking slightly as I pointed it toward the abandoned structure just beyond the field. The night was still, save for the steady chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. But there it was again. Buddy, my loyal golden retriever, howled, his voice cutting through the silence like a siren. My heart skipped a beat. The barn had been empty for years, its roof partially caved in, the paint long since peeled away, leaving the wooden beams exposed to the elements. It was the kind of place you drove past 100 times without giving it a second thought. But tonight, under the pale glow of the moon, it seemed to hold a secret. One Buddy was desperate for me to discover. I gripped the leash tighter, my boots crunching softly against the gravel path as we approached. Buddy strained forward, his tail stiff with a mix of excitement and concern. His ears pricked high as he let out another howl that seemed almost mournful. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard him sound like that. My pulse quickened as I drew closer to the large wooden doors, hanging unevenly on their rusty hinges. The air smelled faintly of hay and damp earth, and something else. Something like old smoke, faint but noticeable. I hesitated at the threshold, shining my flashlight into the shadowy interior, its beam landing on broken farm tools and toppled bales of hay. There was no sign of movement, but Buddy whined low in his throat, pulling harder, leading me inside. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, dust rising in tiny clouds that danced in the light. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe a stray animal had taken shelter inside, or perhaps some teenagers had been using the place to hang out, though the stillness made that unlikely. Then I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible sound, like a whimper. My breath caught. I froze, straining to listen, my eyes darting around the dim space. Buddy barked once, sharply, his body tense, his nose working furiously as he led me toward the far corner of the barn where an old wooden crate sat tipped on its side. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out to move the crate, my flashlight beam quivering. What I saw beneath it made me gasp aloud. There, curled up on a threadbare blanket, was a tiny, shivering puppy, no more than a few weeks old, its fur matted and its ribs faintly visible beneath its skin. Its eyes blinked up at me with fear and a flicker of hope, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Buddy sniffed the pup gently, whining softly as if to reassure it. My heart ached as I knelt down, speaking in the gentlest voice I could muster. "Hey there, little one. It's okay. We're here to help." The puppy whimpered again, trying to lift its frail head before collapsing back onto the blanket. I carefully scooped it into my arms, feeling how light it was, like holding nothing more than a bundle of air and fur. It let out the faintest sigh, as though finally safe. I glanced around the barn once more, searching for any sign of where it had come from, but there was nothing, just silence and shadows. Buddy stayed close, his warm body pressed against my leg as if he understood the importance of this moment. I knew then that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of us had expected when we left home for a simple evening walk. As I held the tiny pup close to my chest, I whispered a promise to it and to myself. Whatever had happened before tonight, things were about to change. And deep down, I had no idea just how much this little soul would change our lives in return. The wind picked up slightly as I stepped out of the barn, clutching the tiny puppy close to my chest, Buddy walking faithfully at my side. The world felt strangely quiet, as though the night itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. The little pup gave a faint whimper against my shirt, its small body trembling, and my heart tightened with a mix of sorrow and determination. This little soul had been left here alone, and I couldn't imagine how frightened and cold it must have been. We crossed the field quickly, my flashlight bouncing with each step, my boots crunching softly on the gravel path, as Buddy kept glancing up at me as if to say we needed to hurry. My truck sat at the edge of the road, the headlights casting long beams into the darkness. I opened the door carefully, sliding in while keeping the puppy cradled against me. Buddy jumped in right after, settling on the seat and leaning his head toward the small bundle in my arms. He sniffed gently, giving a low, comforting whine that made me smile despite the heaviness of the moment. "We'll take you home," I whispered to the puppy as I turned the ignition, the engine humming to life. The drive back felt longer than usual, the night stretching on as I kept glancing down at the fragile life in my arms. I couldn't stop thinking about how long it must have been there in that cold, empty barn. Whoever left it there hadn't cared if it survived or not, and that thought made my chest ache. But now things were going to be different. Pulling into my driveway, I shut off the truck and hurried inside, Buddy right at my heels. The warm glow of the kitchen lights welcomed us in, and I gently set the puppy on a soft towel on the table. It blinked up at me weakly, its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly, its breaths uneven. I quickly grabbed a bowl of warm water, dipping my fingers and letting a few drops touch its mouth. It licked hesitantly, desperate for even that small comfort. Buddy stood nearby, tail low, watching every move I made. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Not tonight. Reaching for my phone, I called Emma, my neighbor who'd spent years volunteering at the local animal shelter. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm but curious, as I explained what had happened. Within 15 minutes, headlights swept across my driveway, and Emma stepped out of her car carrying a small bag. Her eyes softened the moment she saw the puppy. "Poor thing," she murmured, running gentle hands over its frail body. "Malnourished, dehydrated, but there's hope." She looked at me with a reassuring smile, one that eased the tightness in my chest. "You did the right thing bringing it home." Together we worked to feed the puppy tiny drops of warm formula from a syringe, wrapping it in a clean, soft blanket that Buddy had been using for years. The little one's eyes fluttered as it finally drifted into a light sleep, safe for the first time in who knows how long. Buddy curled up close by, resting his head near the blanket, as if to stand guard over our newest family member. Emma stayed for a while, teaching me how to care for such a young and fragile pup. She promised to return in the morning with more supplies and to help arrange a vet visit first thing. As she left, I stood by the window, holding the puppy again, feeling its tiny heartbeat against my palm. Something about this moment felt bigger than just rescuing an abandoned animal. It felt like a turning point, not just for the pup, but for all of us. That night, sleep came slowly. I made a bed near the fireplace, Buddy at my side, the puppy tucked between warm blankets. Every so often, I reached out to make sure it was still breathing, each faint sigh a promise that tomorrow would be brighter. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but in that small circle of warmth and love, it felt like nothing could harm us anymore. And though I had no idea what lay ahead, I knew we had just taken the first step into a journey none of us would ever forget. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the living room, where I had spent the night on the floor beside Buddy and the tiny puppy. My back ached, but I didn't care. The first thing I did when I opened my eyes was check to make sure the little one was still breathing. It was, curled up in its nest of blankets, eyes closed, tiny chest rising and falling steadily. Relief washed over me, stronger than I expected. Buddy wagged his tail softly when I sat up, his gaze fixed on the puppy, as if he'd been keeping watch all night. I smiled, scratching behind his ears before standing and heading to the kitchen to warm up some formula. Today was the beginning of a new routine, one I hadn't planned, but already felt deeply committed to. Whatever this puppy had been through, it wasn't going to suffer anymore. Emma showed up bright and early with a larger bag of supplies and a gentle smile. She crouched by the puppy, checking its condition before preparing a new feeding. "This little one's a fighter," she said softly, watching as the pup eagerly took small sips from the syringe. "With the right care, it has a real chance." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I can't stop thinking about how it ended up in that barn, alone, scared, with no food or water. Who could do something like that? Emma sighed, glancing toward the window. "It happens more than you think, unfortunately. But what matters now is that it's safe thanks to you and Buddy." Buddy's ears perked up at his name, his tail thumping the floor as he leaned over to sniff the pup again. The sight made Emma smile. "Looks like you've got a helper here," she said, reaching out to pet Buddy. After the feeding, we bundled the puppy gently into a small, soft-lined carrier and drove to the local vet. The clinic was quiet when we arrived, a bell chiming softly as we stepped inside. The veterinarian, Dr. Harris, an older man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, ushered us into an exam room right away. He listened carefully as I explained how we found the pup and what we'd done so far. Dr. Harris examined the puppy thoroughly, his movements gentle but precise. "Malnourished, dehydrated, likely has a mild respiratory infection," he said after a moment, his voice calm but serious. "But nothing we can't handle. With proper nutrition, warmth, and antibiotics, it should pull through." Hearing those words made my heart swell with hope. I nodded eagerly, agreeing to whatever treatments were needed. As Dr. Harris gave the first small dose of medicine, the puppy whimpered softly, and Buddy let out a low, comforting whine from where he sat by my feet. Even the vet paused to smile at Buddy's concern. "He's going to make a great big brother," Dr. Harris said warmly. The drive home felt lighter than the day before. The pup, still weak but more alert, lay wrapped in a blanket on my lap. Buddy sat close, occasionally sniffing or licking the edge of the blanket, as if making sure the new arrival knew it wasn't alone anymore. The next few days were a blur of careful feedings, cleaning, vet check-ins, and constant watchfulness. I set alarms through the night to ensure the puppy never went hungry. Buddy rarely left my side, often curling up near the pup's makeshift bed as if standing guard. Slowly but surely, the little one's energy returned. Its once dull eyes began to brighten, and one evening, for the first time, it let out a tiny, tentative bark that made both Buddy and me look up in surprise and joy. Each small milestone felt monumental. The first time it tried to stand on its wobbly legs, Buddy nudged it gently, encouraging it to take another step. The first time it wagged its tail, Emma happened to be visiting, and we all laughed with pure happiness. It was as though this little creature had been given a second chance at life, and it was grabbing onto it with all the strength it had left. but there were still questions lingering in the back of my mind. Who had left the pup in that barn? Why there? And was there a chance more animals had been abandoned somewhere nearby? Late at night, when the house was quiet and the puppy slept soundly beside Buddy, I would sit awake thinking about that barn, about how Buddy had howled as if calling me to find it. It didn't feel like an accident that we had been there at just the right time. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I found myself standing at the edge of my yard, looking toward the distant silhouette of that old barn. Buddy sat beside me, the pup now asleep inside, safe and warm. I placed a hand on Buddy's head and whispered, "I think we need to go back there soon. There might be more that need our help." Buddy looked up at me with those knowing eyes of his, tail giving a single thump, as if he understood every word. And deep down, I felt certain that the night we had found that tiny, abandoned puppy was only the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning began with the soft glow of dawn spilling through my windows and the sounds of Buddy's tail thumping softly against the floor. The puppy had made it through the night with barely a whimper, sleeping soundly in its warm nest of blankets. I leaned over to check on it first thing, feeling a wave of gratitude rush over me when I saw its tiny chest rising steadily. Each day that passed seemed like a small victory, and I was determined to keep it that way. After feeding both dogs and making myself some coffee, I stood by the window, staring out at the distant outline of the barn. Questions still lingered in my mind about why the puppy had been left there and whether there could be more animals in need of help. The thought gnawed at me until I decided I couldn't just sit around wondering. I had to find out. Emma agreed to stop by and watch the puppy for a few hours while I went back to the barn with Buddy. She arrived mid-morning, smiling as the puppy wagged its tiny tail weakly at her. "You're doing wonders with this little one," she said, as she settled on the couch with the pup on her lap. "But I know that look in your eyes. You're not going to rest until you go back out there, are you?" I shook my head. I can't stop thinking about it. What if there's more? What if someone's been using that barn to dump animals they don't want? Emma nodded, understanding. "Go on then. I'll keep things under control here, just be careful." Buddy barked softly as I grabbed my jacket and flashlight. We drove out to the barn, the morning mist still hanging low over the fields. My heart thudded harder the closer we got, every bump of the dirt road making me grip the steering wheel tighter. Buddy sat alert in the passenger seat, watching the world outside with ears pricked forward as if he felt the same urgency I did. When we pulled up, the barn looked just as it had that night, silent, weathered, and empty at first glance, but the stillness carried a weight I couldn't ignore. As I stepped out, Buddy leapt from the truck, nose to the ground immediately, moving with purpose. I followed him inside, the boards creaking underfoot just as before. We searched every corner, moved old crates, and looked under piles of hay, but nothing stirred. No cries, no whimpers, no hidden bundles of fur. For a moment, I thought maybe the little pup we'd rescued had been the only one, a lonely, heartbreaking case of abandonment. But then Buddy stopped abruptly near the far wall, nose pressed against a loose board. He whined low, scratching at it softly. I knelt down, prying the old board away enough to peek behind it. My breath caught when I saw what was hidden there. A small pile of worn, dirty blankets, a rusted water bowl tipped on its side, and scattered bits of kibble long since spoiled. It wasn't just a place where one puppy had been left. It had been a hiding spot used before. Someone had been leaving animals here regularly, But why and who? My stomach churned with anger and sadness. I couldn't believe anyone could treat helpless creatures this way. Buddy let out a quiet whine, and I rested my hand on his head, my voice low but firm. We're going to figure this out, boy. We won't let this happen again. Before leaving, I set down fresh water and some food I'd brought just in case. If another frightened animal showed up, it wouldn't be alone this time. Back at home, Emma listened carefully as I explained what I'd found, her face tightening with concern. This isn't just about one puppy anymore, she said softly. Someone's been doing this for a while. The thought haunted me for the rest of the day, even as I spent hours caring for the little pup. It was getting stronger, wagging its tail more, even taking a few wobbly steps toward Buddy, as if already choosing him as its new protector. Watching the two of them made my heart swell with warmth, a reminder of why I couldn't just let this go. That night, long after Emma had left and the house was quiet, I sat on the couch with the puppy asleep in my arms and Buddy's head resting on my knee. I made a silent promise to them both. We were a team now, and whatever was happening out there, we were going to stop it. No more abandoned animals shivering in the dark. Not if we had anything to say about it. As the clock ticked softly in the background, my eyes drifted to the window where the barn's silhouette barely showed under the moonlight. Something told me this wasn't over, that the howl Buddy had let out that first night had started something bigger than either of us imagined. And deep inside, I knew this journey had only just begun. The following morning came with the scent of fresh rain lingering in the air and the soft sound of the puppy's tiny paws scratching against its blanket. Buddy was already awake, his watchful eyes on the little one as though he had appointed himself guardian for life. The scene made me smile despite the weight in my chest from everything we'd uncovered so far. Something was wrong out there, and someone was responsible for it. Today, I felt more determined than ever to find answers. After feeding both dogs, I bundled the puppy up in a soft blanket and set it beside Buddy while I brewed coffee and made a quick breakfast. Emma arrived not long after, her hair pulled back and a look of quiet determination on her face. I couldn't stop thinking about what you found yesterday, she said as she stepped inside. We need to do something before another poor animal ends up in that barn. I nodded, glancing at the puppy that was now curled up against Buddy's side. I was thinking the same thing. But where do we start? We don't even know who's been doing this. Emma thought for a moment. What if we ask around? Neighbors, people in town, anyone who might have seen something unusual near that barn. That idea made sense. The barn had been abandoned for years, but someone had been there recently enough to leave that setup behind. We couldn't keep waiting for the next tragedy to happen. We needed to be proactive. We drove into town later that morning, Buddy riding in the back seat, while Emma stayed home with the puppy. Our first stop was the small diner where locals often gathered for coffee and conversation. As I walked in, several familiar faces greeted me warmly. I took a deep breath before asking if anyone had noticed strange activity near the old barn on the edge of town. Most shook their heads, but one older man named Walter furrowed his brow thoughtfully. Now that you mention it, he said slowly, I've seen an old beat-up truck parked near there a couple of times late at night. Thought it was just kids messing around. Didn't think much of it. That was more than we'd had before. I asked if he remembered anything else, but Walter just shrugged. Dark green truck, maybe? Rusty. Couldn't see the plates from where I was. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. On the way back, couldn't shake the image of someone driving out under cover of darkness, leaving helpless animals behind in that barn. The anger I felt was overwhelming, but I knew I had to stay focused. We needed proof before we could confront anyone or involve the authorities. Back home, Emma listened as I recounted what Walter had said. "If they're coming at night, maybe we could set up near the barn, see if they show up again," she suggested carefully. I glanced at Buddy, who seemed to sense the tension in our voices. He gave a low bark, as if volunteering for the task. That evening, after ensuring the puppy was safe and warm at home, Emma and I drove back out to the barn with Buddy. We parked a short distance away and waited in the dark, the truck's engine off, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Hours passed slowly, the moon climbing higher in the sky. Then, just when I thought the night would end in silence, headlights appeared in the distance. A truck rumbled down the dirt road, its engine low and steady. My pulse quickened as it drew closer, eventually pulling up near the barn. Through the dim light, I could just make out a dark green rusty pickup, just as Walter had described. Buddy shifted beside me, tense but quiet, his eyes locked on the truck. We watched as the driver's door opened and a figure climbed out, moving toward the barn. They carried something small in their arms, and my heart clenched when I realized what it was: a tiny, frightened puppy. Emma put a hand on my arm, her face pale. "They're doing it again," she whispered. We stayed quiet, watching as the person set the puppy down inside the barn, tossed an old blanket beside it, and walked back to the truck. As soon as the vehicle drove off into the night, I jumped out, Buddy following close behind. We rushed into the barn, my flashlight beam sweeping over the floor until it landed on the tiny bundle of fur shivering in the corner. This one was even smaller than the first, its cries heartbreaking in the stillness. I scooped it up gently, feeling the same rush of protectiveness I had the night Buddy led me here. "It's okay now," I murmured, my voice shaking with emotion. "We've got you." As we drove home, the new puppy nestled in my lap. I felt both relief and determination hardening in my chest. We had saved another life tonight, but the person doing this was still out there. And now, more than ever, I knew we couldn't stop until they were found, and these cruel abandonments ended for good. Buddy rested his head on my shoulder as if to say he was with me every step of the way, and deep inside I believed it. Whatever came next, we weren't backing down. The next morning arrived with gray clouds hanging low in the sky, as though the world itself shared the heaviness in my heart. Two tiny puppies now slept curled together in a blanket-lined basket by the fireplace, their soft breaths barely audible over the crackle of the flames. Buddy sat close to them, his eyes alert but tender, his body forming a protective barrier around their fragile forms. I sipped my coffee slowly, staring at the little ones, my mind running in circles. Whoever was abandoning these pups was still out there, free to do it again. I couldn't let that happen. Emma stopped by after breakfast, her face lighting up when she saw the two pups nestled safely inside. "They're beautiful," she said softly, crouching to stroke the smaller one's head. "But this has to stop. We can't just keep rescuing them one by one and hope it ends on its own." "I know," I said, setting my mug down with a sigh. "I've been thinking. If we know what kind of truck it is and what time they usually come, maybe we can finally get proof. We need to catch them in the act." We spent most of the morning making a plan. Emma would help me set up a camera near the barn while I stayed nearby with Buddy, ready to intervene if another animal was left behind. If we could get a clear shot of the truck and the person's face, we could finally take it to the authorities and put an end to this. By late afternoon, we had the camera hidden in a good spot with a view of the barn entrance. As night fell, we parked the truck a short distance away, Buddy sitting silently in the back seat, his ears tuned to every sound. The hours dragged by slowly, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind in the trees. The tension in my chest felt like a weight I couldn't shake, but I stayed focused. If the truck came again tonight, this nightmare might finally be over. It was past midnight when headlights appeared in the distance. My breath caught as the same rusty green pickup rumbled toward the barn, moving slowly down the dirt road. I held Buddy's collar gently, whispering, "Easy, boy," as the truck came to a stop. The figure climbed out. A man in a worn jacket and baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He opened the passenger door and pulled out another small, trembling puppy. Every muscle in my body screamed to run forward, to stop this from happening again. But I forced myself to stay still, watching carefully as Emma's camera captured every moment. The man carried the puppy into the barn, set it down on the ground with nothing more than a torn rag for comfort, and turned back toward his truck. That was all I could take. I threw open the truck door, Buddy leaping out beside me as I called out, my voice ringing through the night. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The man froze, whipping his head toward me. For a split second, his face was visible under the glow of the truck's headlights, a face weathered by years of hard living, eyes wide with surprise and something like guilt. Then he bolted for his truck. "Wait!" I shouted, but he scrambled into the cab, the engine roaring to life. Gravel flew behind the wheels as he sped off into the darkness, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of my own angry heartbeat. Buddy barked furiously, running a few paces after the truck before circling back to me. I swallowed hard, fighting a mix of frustration and sorrow. We had scared him off, but at least we had the footage. And there, in the barn, another innocent life was left behind. I ran inside, my flashlight beam landing on the tiny pup curled in the corner, shivering and crying softly. Kneeling down, I scooped it up gently, whispering the same promise I'd made before. "You're safe now. You'll never be left alone again." Back at the house, the new arrival joined the other two, curling into the warmth of the basket as Buddy settled beside them. Emma transferred the camera footage onto her laptop, replaying it in silence as we watched the man's every move captured clearly on screen. "This is enough," she said firmly, her jaw set. "We can take this to the sheriff tomorrow. He won't be able to walk away from this." I nodded, my hand resting on Buddy's head, feeling his steady presence grounding me. I looked at the 3 tiny lives now safe in my home and felt both sadness for what they'd endured and hope for what lay ahead. The man who'd done this hadn't escaped entirely. We had his face, his truck, and the truth. As dawn crept through the windows, casting soft light on the puppies sleeping peacefully for the first time in their lives, I made another silent vow. We weren't stopping until there were no more cries in that abandoned barn. No more lonely nights for innocent souls left to fend for themselves. And with Buddy by my side, I knew we'd see this through, no matter what it took. The morning after we captured the footage, the world felt heavier yet filled with purpose. The 3 puppies snuggled together near the fire, their soft whimpers replaced by tiny snores. Buddy lay nearby, his head resting on his paws but his eyes flicking open every few minutes to check on them. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, replaying the video while sipping her coffee. We had proof now, and today we had to act on it. By mid-morning, we drove into town with the footage saved on a flash drive. The sheriff's office sat near the center square, a small, weathered building with an old American flag fluttering outside. My stomach knotted as we parked, Buddy sitting upright in the back seat, as though he understood what we were about to do. Inside, Sheriff Hawkins greeted us with a curious look, his kind but tired eyes scanning our faces as he asked what brought us in. We explained everything: Buddy's discovery that first night, the repeated trips to the barn, and finally the video of the man abandoning another helpless puppy. Hawkins listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When we showed him the footage, he leaned in close, frowning as the man's features came into focus under the truck's headlights. "I know this guy," Hawkins said finally. "Lives a few miles out past Miller's Creek. Been on my radar for a while for other things, but never had enough to make a case." The sheriff promised to handle it discreetly but firmly, assuring us that abandoning animals like this was a serious crime. He took our statements, thanked us for stepping in, and promised that he'd be visiting the man soon. As we left the office, a cautious hope stirred in me. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point we'd been waiting for. Back home, the puppies were still sleeping soundly when we arrived, their bellies round from the morning feeding. Buddy wagged his tail happily when he saw them, lying down beside their basket like the devoted protector he had become. Emma stayed for lunch, the two of us talking about the future. What would happen to the puppies once they were strong enough, whether we could keep one, and how to make sure no other animals were ever left in that barn again. The afternoon was peaceful, but beneath the calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The man had abandoned 3 puppies that we knew of, but how many others had been left before we found them? How many nights had cries gone unheard in that lonely barn? The thought made my stomach twist. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Sheriff Hawkins. He told me they had located the man, spoken to him, and were opening an investigation. Apparently, he had been breeding dogs irresponsibly, discarding the ones he couldn't sell. My hands clenched around the phone in anger as I listened, horrified by the cruelty of it all. But Hawkins assured me that the man would face charges and that the remaining dogs on his property were being taken into safe care. Justice was finally on its way, even if late. After the call, I sat on the couch, Buddy resting his head in my lap while the puppies nestled together in their basket. Emma, sitting across from me, gave a small smile. "You know," she said softly, "if Buddy hadn't howled that first night, we might never have known. Those little lives might not have been saved." I looked down at my loyal friend, his warm brown eyes gazing up at me with quiet understanding. My throat tightened with emotion. "He's the real hero," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. I just followed where he led. Night fell gently over the house, but this time, the darkness felt different. There was still work to be done, many wounds to heal for these pups and others like them. But for the first time since this began, I felt a glimmer of real hope. The barn, once a place of heartbreak, would never again be a dumping ground for helpless lives. And as I watched Buddy curl protectively around the 3 tiny souls who now had a chance at happiness, I knew this fight wasn't over. We were only just beginning. The days following the sheriff's call were a blur of caring for the puppies and adjusting to the new reality that things might finally change for the better. Yet despite the glimmer of hope, there was still a lingering tension in the air. a quiet unease that neither Emma nor I could quite shake. Buddy seemed to sense it too. He was protective but restless, pacing near the windows at night, his ears twitching at every sound outside. It was as if he knew that while one danger had been confronted, the story wasn't over. One chilly morning, we decided to take all 3 puppies out into the yard for the first time. They were stronger now, their tiny legs wobbling as they explored the grass, sniffing curiously at the world beyond their blanket. Buddy stayed close, circling them like a proud parent, occasionally nudging one back toward the center when it strayed too far. Emma laughed softly at the sight, her hands shoved into her jacket pockets. "They're going to have such a good life," she said, a mixture of relief and determination in her voice. I wanted to believe that wholeheartedly, but there were still too many questions unanswered. What if there were other people out there doing the same thing as the man we'd caught? What if there were more barns, more abandoned animals waiting in the dark? The thought gnawed at me, stirring a quiet resolve. Saving these 3 wasn't enough. We had to make sure no more animals suffered that way, not in our town and not if we could help it. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Hawkins stopped by with an update. He told us that the man responsible had been charged and the dogs on his property rescued by local shelters. They were malnourished but safe now, with volunteers working tirelessly to nurse them back to health. He thanked us for what we'd done and mentioned that our story had spread quickly, inspiring more people in the community to speak out about mistreatment they'd witnessed. Hearing that sent a warmth through me. Maybe Buddy's howl had started something bigger than we ever expected. Emma and I began talking about how we could help further. We spent long evenings at the kitchen table with notebooks spread out, jotting down ideas for raising awareness, supporting shelters, and ensuring abandoned animals never went unnoticed again. Buddy lay beside us, occasionally nudging a fallen pen or resting his chin on my knee as if urging us to keep going. The puppies, now more playful and adventurous, seemed to fill the house with a joy that reminded us of why we had to keep fighting for others like them. One night, about a week later, we decided to revisit the barn. It felt important, like closing a chapter and opening a new one. We bundled up, loaded Buddy into the truck, and drove down the familiar dirt road under a silver moon. The barn stood silent and empty. No cries, no movement, just the sound of wind brushing against its worn wooden walls. Stepping inside, I felt a weight lift from my chest. This place had once been filled with pain and fear, but now it was just a shell, waiting for time and nature to reclaim it. Buddy walked ahead of us, sniffing every corner as if making sure no more little souls were left behind. When he came back and sat quietly at my feet, I knew he understood. It was truly over for this barn. I crouched down, hugging him tightly, whispering a quiet thank you for everything he'd done. Without his howl that first night, without his persistence, who knows how many would have been lost. Driving home, Emma rested her head on the window, watching the passing fields. "We should do more than just help these puppies," she said softly. "We could work with the shelters, volunteer, maybe even set up a program for abandoned animals." I glanced at her and smiled. She was right. This wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning of a new mission, one that Buddy had led us to without saying a single word. Back home, we sat on the floor playing with the puppies, watching them tumble and yip with excitement. Buddy joined in, patient and gentle, letting them climb over him like a living playground. The sight filled me with a happiness so profound it was hard to put into words. Life had thrown these little ones a cruel start, but now they had safety, love, and a future. And for the first time, it felt like the darkness surrounding that barn had finally been pushed back by something brighter than we ever imagined. Still, somewhere deep down, I knew there was more to come. There were more lives to save, more hearts to heal, and Buddy would make sure we heard every call for help that came our way. The following week brought a fresh sense of purpose to our days. The puppies were growing stronger, their tiny barks filling the house with energy that made every corner feel alive. Buddy had taken to sleeping near their little pen, standing guard as if he had made a promise only he understood. Emma and I couldn't help but smile every time we caught him nudging one back toward safety when it wandered too close to the edge. Yet despite the warmth in our home, I could not ignore the growing number of calls we were getting from people who had heard about what happened at the barn. Stories of other abandoned animals, reports of strays wandering alone on back roads, whispers of neglect happening just beyond town limits. It was like a door had been opened, and now every hidden pain had a voice. One morning, a woman named Karen stopped by. She had heard about Buddy's howl in the barn and wanted to share what she had seen weeks earlier. According to her, there was another rundown structure on the far side of the county where she had seen a similar rusty truck parked late at night. She hadn't thought much of it then, but now worried it might be connected. Her words lingered in my mind long after she left, planting a seed of unease I couldn't shake. That evening, Emma and I sat with coffee mugs in hand, talking in hushed voices while the puppies played at our feet. "We can't ignore it," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. "If there's another place where this is happening, we have to see it for ourselves." Emma nodded slowly, worry etched across her face but resolve shining brighter. Buddy lifted his head as if he already understood where we were headed next. The next day, we packed supplies, leashes, blankets, and water, preparing as though we already knew what we might find. We drove miles out past the quiet farms where the land turned into wide, empty stretches broken only by old fence lines and long-forgotten paths. Eventually, we found the crumbling structure Karen had described, a weather-beaten shed tucked behind overgrown brush, hidden from the main road. We parked a distance away and approached on foot, Buddy leading with cautious steps, his nose twitching at every shift in the breeze. The smell hit me first, faint but familiar, a sour, lingering scent that made my stomach twist. We inched closer, my flashlight beam cutting through the dim interior as the sun dipped low on the horizon. At first, it seemed empty, nothing but dust and broken boards. Then Buddy let out a low whine, pulling me toward a darkened corner. There, huddled together, were two more abandoned dogs, thin and trembling, their eyes wide with fear. My heart ached as I crouched down, speaking softly to them, letting them sniff my hand before lifting them carefully into the blanket Emma had spread out. They were scared but not aggressive, just desperate for warmth and safety. As we carried them back to the truck, Buddy trotting beside us, a heavy realization settled over me. This wasn't an isolated act of cruelty. There were more people doing this, more places where lives were being thrown away as if they didn't matter. Back home, the newcomers were fed and bathed, their frail bodies soaking up every bit of love we could offer. The puppies we had rescued first sniffed at them curiously before accepting them into the fold, tails wagging as if they already understood they were part of something bigger now, a family built on second chances. Emma and I sat together on the floor that night, the room filled with the sound of small paws and quiet sighs of contentment. It felt overwhelming, but in the best way possible, like we were finally doing something that mattered. Over the next few days, word spread even further. Volunteers started showing up, offering food, blankets, and time to help care for the growing number of rescues we were taking in. The sheriff reached out to coordinate efforts, promising to investigate similar reports across the county. It wasn't just us anymore. It was a community standing together against the quiet suffering that had been ignored for too long. Through it all, Buddy remained at the heart of everything. He seemed to know when a frightened dog needed comfort, lying beside it until the trembling stopped. He watched over the little ones as if their safety was his personal mission, his loyalty unshakable. Sometimes I would look at him and think about that first night at the barn, about the way his howl had changed everything. Without him, none of this would have begun. He had given these animals a voice when no one else had listened, and because of him, lives were being saved every single day now. As I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun sink low while dogs played in the yard, I felt a deep certainty settle in my chest. This was only the start. There were more calls to answer, more dark corners of the world that needed light. And as long as Buddy was by my side, leading the way with his keen nose and fierce heart, I knew we wouldn't stop. The following days moved in a blur of tireless activity, yet every moment felt charged with purpose. Calls kept coming in, each one leading us to new places where animals had been left alone to fend for themselves. Buddy had turned into a hero in everyone's eyes, but to me, he was still the same loyal friend whose howl that night had opened the door to all of this. Each rescue brought more wagging tails, frightened eyes softening into trust, and the house that once felt quiet now pulsed with life and hope. Emma and I had started to organize the growing effort, connecting with other volunteers who were willing to foster the animals until permanent homes could be found. Our living room had transformed into a hub of warmth and activity, blankets spread across the floor, food bowls lined neatly against the wall. People we had never met before were showing up at our doorstep with donations, wanting to be a part of something that felt bigger than all of us. Every time a rescued dog was matched with a loving family, it was as if a piece of the world had been set right again. But there were still shadows we hadn't chased away yet. The dark green truck had vanished for now, but the feeling in my gut told me the person behind those abandonments wasn't gone. Some nights, Buddy would sit near the window, ears perked, as if listening for a sound only he could hear. The memory of that barn, the emptiness of it before we brought warmth back inside, pushed me forward every day. One late evening, Karen called again. She had heard whispers of another place where dogs were being dumped, far deeper into the woods past the county line. It wasn't much, but Emma and I knew we couldn't ignore it. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, we loaded the truck with supplies, Buddy hopping in with quiet determination. The road ahead felt heavy, but there was no question about what needed to be done. We drove for hours, past winding back roads where old trees arched overhead, their branches tangled like secrets. Eventually, we reached a dirt path almost swallowed by weeds. The shed we found at the end was worse than the last. Broken boards hanging loose, roof sagging, a silent witness to too many terrible nights. The moment I opened the door, Buddy let out a low growl, his hackles raised. Inside, huddled in the filth, were 3 dogs this time, each one thin and shaking, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. We worked quickly, speaking softly as we wrapped them in blankets, giving them sips of water before carrying them out to the truck. Buddy moved among them with careful steps, his presence a comfort they seemed to understand immediately. Driving home, my hands gripped the wheel tightly, anger simmering beneath the surface. Whoever was doing this wasn't just careless. They were cruel, abandoning these lives as if they were nothing. Back at home, the new rescues were welcomed by the others, tails wagging, gentle noses greeting them like old friends. Watching them begin to relax, to believe they were safe, reminded me why none of this could stop now. Emma sat beside me on the porch later that night, exhaustion in her eyes, but also a quiet fire that matched my own. We talked about the next steps, working closer with the sheriff, setting up cameras near the barns, tracking down that truck before more lives were thrown away. The community had started to come alive in ways I hadn't seen before. People who once looked the other way now called in every strange sighting of a stray or an abandoned place. Fosters opened their homes, kids showed up with handmade blankets for the dogs, and Buddy became something of a local legend. Parents told their children how one dog's howl had saved so many lives, how it had sparked a kindness that spread through every corner of town. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the yard in golden light, I watched Buddy surrounded by the rescues, all of them playing and tumbling in the grass. It struck me that this wasn't just about stopping something bad anymore. It was about building something good, something lasting. A world where no animal had to cry alone in the dark of an abandoned barn ever again. And as Buddy looked up at me, eyes bright with the same fierce loyalty that had started it all, I knew in my heart we were only just beginning. The following week carried a different kind of energy, one that had me waking before dawn every day, driven by both hope and the lingering weight of what still needed to be done. The calls didn't stop. Every morning, another tip came in, someone seeing that dark green truck, or finding a dog wandering near the edges of town. Each report felt like a plea, a reminder that our fight wasn't over. Emma and I threw ourselves into it, every spare moment spent following leads, caring for the rescues, and keeping in touch with fosters who were giving these animals a chance to heal. One morning, Buddy sat by the door as if he already knew where we were headed before I even grabbed the keys. A farmer named Dave had called about hearing dogs crying near an abandoned field on his property. We drove out there quickly, the landscape opening up into wide stretches of golden grass, the air thick with the smell of summer rain still clinging to the earth from the night before. Buddy jumped out first, nose to the ground, his body taut with focus. I followed close behind, calling softly, hoping that whoever was out there could hear the kindness in my voice and not run deeper into fear. We found 2 dogs under a fallen tree, both shaking, one limping badly. They were young, barely more than pups. Their thin bodies told a story I didn't need words for. As I scooped one up and Emma gathered the other, my heart ached with both sadness and resolve. It wasn't enough to just save them. We had to stop this from ever happening again. Back home, the house was alive with wagging tails and soft barks as the rescues greeted the new arrivals. It amazed me how quickly they welcomed each other. No hesitation, just a shared understanding of survival and the relief of safety. Watching them curled together later, finding warmth in one another, I realized that even though we were still hunting answers, these small victories mattered deeply. Every single life saved made the weight on my shoulders just a little lighter. But there were restless nights too, moments when I sat on the porch with Buddy beside me, staring out at the dark horizon. I thought about that truck, about the hands that had left so many innocent lives alone to suffer. It was hard not to let anger take over, but I knew I had to stay steady. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ending a cycle of cruelty and making sure no more dogs ended up howling for help in the middle of nowhere. The community kept rallying around us. More people joined the effort, offering land for temporary shelters, volunteering to drive late at night to check on old barns and empty lots. Kids drew pictures of Buddy and the rescues, taping them to our fence as if to tell the dogs they were loved by more hearts than they could imagine. Even the sheriff began working more closely with us, promising extra patrols near the areas where we suspected the truck might return. One evening, Emma and I drove out to a new lead, a small bridge where someone had seen a dog left alone days before. The sky turned a deep purple as we searched, Buddy leading the way down a narrow trail. And there, just before the tree line, we found her. A tiny white puppy, sitting in the mud, as if waiting for someone who never came back. The look in her eyes when I knelt down told me everything I needed to know. She had been left, but she hadn't given up hope. We brought her home, another small miracle added to the growing family of survivors. As I sat on the floor later, surrounded by soft fur and sleepy sighs, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about rewriting the story for every single one of these dogs, giving them a future that had never been promised before. Buddy seemed to understand too, curling up against me, his warmth a reminder of how far we'd come since that first night at the barn. There were still unknowns, dangers, and long roads ahead, but sitting there, holding the newest little life we had saved, I felt a deep certainty settle in my chest. We weren't done yet, not by a long shot, and as long as there were cries to answer, we would keep going, one rescue at a time, until the silence of abandonment was replaced by the sounds of joy and belonging forever. The days following the last rescue blurred together in a mix of late-night drives, whispered phone calls, and moments of quiet comfort with the dogs that had come to rely on us. Each morning, I woke to the sound of paws padding across the floor, tails thumping softly against furniture, and the occasional bark that felt more like a good morning than a demand. Buddy seemed to have taken on the role of protector for every new arrival, watching over them with a calm that steadied my own heart when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm me. Emma and I kept following every lead, no matter how small. One evening, a young woman called saying she had seen the same green truck parked near a storage shed on the outskirts of town. We drove out there, hearts pounding with the possibility of finding the person responsible. But by the time we arrived, the truck was gone, leaving nothing behind but muddy tire tracks and a lingering sense of frustration. It felt like chasing shadows, yet we couldn't stop. Each unanswered question felt like a risk for another helpless animal left to fend for itself. The house was growing fuller by the day. With the help of the fosters and neighbors, we managed to keep every rescue fed, warm, and cared for. There was a quiet magic in seeing once terrified dogs slowly learn to trust again. The first time one wagged its tail or curled up to sleep without trembling, it felt like watching a sunrise after weeks of storm clouds. Those moments fueled everything we did, kept us going when exhaustion set in or when a lead turned up empty. One particularly hot afternoon, I drove out with Buddy to check an old barn that hadn't been on anyone's list yet. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the empty fields. As we approached, Buddy's ears pricked up, and he started pulling toward the door. I followed his lead, heart in my throat, and when I pushed the door open, I found a crate tucked away in the far corner. Inside were 3 puppies, barely old enough to walk, their cries faint but desperate. My chest tightened as I lifted them one by one, whispering reassurances, even though I knew they couldn't understand my words yet. They understood tone, though. They understood kindness. Their tiny bodies relaxed just enough to let me know they felt safe. That night, Emma and I stayed up late cleaning and feeding the newest rescues. The living room looked like a patchwork of blankets, bowls, and sleeping dogs, each one a story of survival and a promise of something better ahead. We sat on the floor, Buddy between us, the weight of the day pressing down, and yet feeling worth every second. Emma glanced at me, her eyes soft but tired. "We're going to stop this," she said quietly, and I believed her. I had to. The community support grew stronger every day. People started leaving food and supplies on our porch, small handwritten notes thanking Buddy for leading us to the barn that first night. It was strange, having hope take root in the same place where fear had once been. These dogs weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning to live, to play, to love. And in saving them, we were somehow saving a part of ourselves too. Even with all the uncertainty, I couldn't help but notice the change in Buddy. He had always been brave, but now there was a lightness in his steps, as though he knew he had a purpose bigger than himself. He wasn't just my companion anymore. He had become the guardian of second chances for every dog that found its way to us. Watching him move among the rescues, calming the anxious ones, nudging the shy ones to eat, I realized that what started as one desperate howl by an abandoned barn had turned into a chorus of hope that wouldn't be silenced. We weren't done yet, not even close. The green truck was still out there, and more dogs needed saving. But as I lay down that night, surrounded by the soft breathing of those who had found safety under our roof, I felt stronger than ever. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more searching, more heartbreak, and more healing. And no matter how long it took, Buddy and I would be there, answering every cry, shining light into every dark corner where hope still waited to be found. Morning light spilled through the curtains as the sound of soft whimpers stirred me awake. The house was alive with the quiet chaos of dogs stretching, yawning, and seeking breakfast. Buddy sat by the door, his posture alert, eyes fixed on me as if waiting for the day's mission to begin. I rubbed my face, exhaustion clinging to me, yet beneath it was the same relentless drive that had carried us this far. There were still more dogs out there, more cries unanswered, and I couldn't stop until every last one was safe. Emma arrived not long after, carrying bags of donated food and supplies. Her smile was tired but genuine as she set them down and greeted every wagging tail in sight. "People are starting to talk," she said, glancing around the room filled with rescues. "They're saying whoever's been doing this might be nervous now, knowing someone's watching." I wanted to believe that was true, but part of me knew better. Whoever it was hadn't stopped yet. Each night felt like a gamble, wondering if another dog would be left out there, waiting for a kindness that never came. We spent the morning caring for the dogs, feeding, cleaning, offering gentle touches to those still learning what love felt like. Every small victory, a lick on the hand, a tail wag, fueled the fire to keep going. Later, we followed up on another lead. A farmer on the far side of town had seen a green truck passing his property late at night, heading toward an unused storage barn. Buddy was restless the entire drive, his nose pressed against the window as if he could already sense something ahead. When we reached the spot, the air felt heavy, the kind of silence that holds its breath. We waited in the truck until the sun dipped low and the world grew quiet again. Hours passed, and just when I thought the night would offer no answers, headlights cut through the darkness. The green truck appeared, moving slowly down the dirt path, pulling up near the barn. My heart pounded as we crouched low, watching as the driver stepped out, cradling another tiny figure in their arms. My fists clenched at the sight. How many more had there been before we'd started looking? How many would there be if we didn't stop this? As soon as the truck drove away, Buddy bolted forward, leading me straight to the small crate left by the barn door. Inside was a single puppy, shaking and silent with fear. I scooped it up, whispering soft words, feeling its fragile body tremble against my chest. Emma's voice wavered as she said, "We can't just keep finding them like this. We need proof. We need to end it." On the drive back, as I glanced at the rearview mirror, at the newest life we had saved, at Buddy's solemn face beside it. Something had to change. Tomorrow, I would start reaching out to authorities, gathering every witness, every photo, every clue. This wasn't just about rescuing anymore. This was about making sure no other dog knew the terror of that barn again. Back home, the house was quiet except for the soft sounds of sleeping dogs. I sat on the floor, surrounded by warmth and life, yet haunted by the image of that truck vanishing into the night. My hand rested on Buddy's head as he leaned against me, and I made a silent promise. We would not stop, not until every abandoned cry in the dark had been silenced by safety, love, and a chance at life that every single one of them deserved. The next morning broke gray and still, a mist hanging low over the fields as if the world itself was holding its breath. I woke to the soft sounds of paws shifting on the floorboards, a few sleepy yawns and quiet whines echoing through the house. Buddy was sitting by the door again, his eyes locked on me like he already knew today would be another step toward the truth. My body ached from restless sleep, but I couldn't ignore that steady pull inside me. The need to see this through for every single dog we had rescued, and everyone still waiting. Emma showed up just after sunrise, her arms full of coffee cups and determination. She set them down on the table and met my eyes with a firm nod. "I talked to a friend at the sheriff's office," she said. "They'll meet us later today, but they need more than stories to act. They need to catch this person in the act, or at least have clear evidence of what's happening." I glanced around at the dogs, some curled up together, others exploring the corners of the room. They were safe now, but the thought of others left in the dark, abandoned and scared, twisted my stomach into knots. We spent the morning tending to every wagging tail and soft nose, feeding them, cleaning up, whispering reassurance to the ones who still flinched at sudden movements. Each moment reminded me why none of this could stop halfway. These lives depended on it. By early afternoon, we packed up a small camera, a notepad, and everything we might need if the green truck appeared again. Buddy paced the doorway as we prepared, his ears pricked, energy radiating from him like he understood every word we were saying. When we drove toward the outskirts of town, he kept his nose to the window, eyes sharp and searching. The sun dipped lower as we parked in the shadows near the same dirt path where we had found the last puppy. Emma sat beside me, quiet but tense, watching the empty road ahead. The hours dragged on, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, just as the first stars began to pierce the night sky, the low rumble of an engine reached us. Headlights glowed in the distance, the same battered green truck creeping down the path. I gripped the camera, heart hammering as I started recording. We stayed low, barely breathing as the truck stopped by the barn. The driver stepped out, a hood pulled over their head, carrying a small cardboard box. My chest tightened as I watched them set the box down, glance around briefly, and retreat to the truck without a moment of hesitation or remorse. The vehicle drove off, swallowed by the night once more. Buddy broke from his stillness, tugging at the leash to lead me forward. We ran to the box, my flashlight beam shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside were two tiny puppies, their fur matted, eyes wide and frightened. My breath caught, a mix of rage and heartbreak flooding through me. I held them close, promising softly that they were safe now. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. "We got it all on video. That's what they needed." She looked toward the dark road where the truck had vanished. "We're going to stop this, finally." We drove home in silence. The puppies nestled between blankets on my lap, their small bodies shaking as they drifted into exhausted sleep. Buddy kept his gaze on them the entire ride, as if silently vowing to protect them forever. When we reached the house, I set the camera on the table and looked at Emma. "Tomorrow, we go to the sheriff's office. This has to end." As the night settled in, I sat on the floor among the dogs, listening to their soft breaths, feeling the warmth of their presence all around me. The battle wasn't over, but a flicker of hope sparked inside me. We had proof now. We had a chance to stop the heartbreak from repeating again and again. I placed my hand on Buddy's head and whispered a promise I intended to keep. "We're not stopping, not until every last one of them is safe." Morning came slowly, wrapped in thick fog that clung to the windows and made the world outside feel far away. The house was quiet, but not still. The sound of paws shuffling across wood, the soft jingle of tags, and the low sigh of Buddy settling down at the foot of the couch created a familiar rhythm. I sat at the table with the camera in front of me, the memory card already backed up, and the evidence copied onto a flash drive in my coat pocket. Today was the day. No more waiting, no more chasing shadows. Emma arrived just after sunrise, her coat zipped high against the cold, her eyes focused. She didn't need to ask if I was ready. We had both reached a place where the urgency outweighed any lingering fear or doubt. She knelt to greet Buddy, whispering something into his fur before standing and nodding. I grabbed the flash drive, slipped it into a small envelope, and together we stepped out into the fog. The drive to the sheriff's office was quiet. The roads were empty, the fields barely visible through the mist. The closer we got, the tighter my grip on the steering wheel became. This wasn't just about one man in a green truck. It was about every dog that had been left behind, every howl that had gone unanswered, and every person who had looked the other way. We weren't here to place blame. We were here to stop something that had gone on too long. Sheriff Hawkins was waiting for us at the front desk, his eyes heavy but focused. He led us into his office without a word, closing the door behind us. I handed him the envelope and watched as he inserted the drive into his computer. The room filled with the grainy image of the green truck pulling up to the barn, the hooded figure stepping out with a box, placing it by the door, and walking away without a single pause or glance back. He watched the video through to the end, then clicked to the still image I had taken. The face caught for just a second in the glow of the headlights. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "We've got him," he said. We sat in silence as he made the call. Deputies were dispatched to the last known address tied to the truck's license plate, and officers from the Animal Control Unit were notified to be on standby. Emma and I left the office feeling like something had shifted. like the weight we'd been carrying for so long had finally begun to lift. We didn't know what the next few hours would hold, but for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it might actually be over soon. Back at the house, Buddy met us at the door with his usual quiet presence. The puppies we'd rescued last night were curled up near the fire, fast asleep. The others greeted us with wagging tails and soft barks, their lives now woven into the fabric of our days. We spent the morning cleaning, feeding, and preparing the space for what came next. If more dogs were found, we would be ready. That afternoon, the call came. Sheriff Hawkins told us they'd found the man. His property held evidence of multiple abandoned litters, some too late to save, others clinging to survival. The green truck sat parked in the weeds, its engine still warm. The man was taken into custody without resistance. When they questioned him, he admitted to everything. The litters he couldn't sell, the ones born sick, the ones he didn't have the money or patience for. He'd been discarding them for months. I sat down heavily after the call ended, my chest tight, emotions rushing in too fast to make sense of. Relief, anger, sorrow. But most of all, I felt still. Still in a way I hadn't felt since the night Buddy first howled by that barn. The source of the pain had a name now, and it would never touch another life again. That night, the house felt full. Not just in bodies, but in spirit. Volunteers came by with extra supplies. One family brought a crate of toys and treats, staying long enough to let their children sit on the floor with the dogs. Emma baked something sweet and warm, and the smell drifted through the house as soft music played. We didn't celebrate in the loud sense, but in a quiet way that meant more. There was peace here now. I sat on the porch after everyone had gone, Buddy resting at my feet, his head on my boot. The stars were faint, the fog finally lifting. The barn in the distance was barely visible, but I didn't need to see it to remember. I thought about everything it had held, everything it had witnessed, and what it had given back. Without that place, without Buddy's howl echoing into the cold night, none of this would have happened. We had turned something broken into something healing. Each life saved had given purpose to the next. And while the road ahead would always have new calls, new rescues, and new heartbreaks, we had created something that couldn't be undone. I looked down at Buddy and smiled. "We did it," I whispered. He blinked up at me, his eyes soft and sure. And in that moment, I knew he understood. The barn was quiet now, and the cries that had once haunted the night had finally been answered.